So, assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm Faria Ali. I'm a corporate lawyer. I work in London. I am also the Vice Chair of Muslim Aid, and I chair the British Pakistan Foundation and Newtest, which is an inter-firm network of 30 of the largest law firms, and we work to promote diversity and inclusion in the legal sector. So that's me professionally, but I think more importantly for today's purposes, I'm also Mancunian. I was born and raised here. I went to school in Altrincham. I moved to Oxford for university, and it was only meant to be a bit of a detour when I went and did a vacation scheme in London, and I somehow ended up staying. So, in part, the purpose of the session today, I think, is to convince me to come back now.
We'll do our best.
So that's me. I'll hand over to Eve, perhaps you for an introduction first.
Sure. So it's brilliant to be here. Thank you for the invite and pleased to be with you all. So I'm Eve. I am a Mancunian. I actually grew up and lived 10 minutes from here. In fact, my dad moved to North here in order to study in this building, and he lived here when it was a theology college about 30 odd years ago, or more than that, 40 years ago. So I've spent most of my 45 years living locally in Wally Range, and I love this place. I think this space and all of you who bring people in here are absolutely phenomenal. In terms of my career, so I was also a lawyer for the first 15 years of my career. I also went to Oxford, but I quite quickly moved back north. Please do the same. And then I moved on from being a lawyer for 15 years in public services law to being in the charity sector, and led in the charity sector for 15 years. I also overlapped that with 6 years as a politician, and I'm now consolidating, I think, all that experience working at the Burnham's office as a combined authority. And I guess there's a common golden thread that runs through all of that a real belief in social justice, that all of those different sectors and careers were all with a view of how do we enable everybody to basically live a good life. So good to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, pardon me, and salam alaikum, greetings, peace, love to one and all. My name is Ismail Lee South. I'm born and bred in London town. Please. And I'll just make it extra spicy. I am also an Arsenal supporter. Okay. I'm giving you a slice of what I get at home. My wife is a Mancunian.
Yay!
And she is the one. When we got married, this is not a love story, by the way. When we got married, alhamdulillah, I met her at a wedding, but that's another story. And when we got married, she was from Manchester. She came down to live with me in London. She lived with me in London for around 7-8 years, and she said, London is too crazy. We need to move to Manchester. I thought she was crazy. We leave London to move to Manchester. I told my friends, they were laughing. Ismail's never gonna leave London. Ismail is a Londoner through and through. Bangers and mash Londoner. Alhamdulillah, to all the brothers out there, married and not married, looking for a wife, a little advice from a boring old man. Happy wife, happy life. To make it fluid, happy spouse, happy house. You cater for everybody in communities. Anyway, I won't take it further. So anyway, cut a long story short, I moved to Manchester in 2014. Oh my gosh, over 10 years ago. Alhamdulillah, it's one of the best decisions I've made. I'm not going to lie and pretend. The first 6 to 8 months, I thought I made a mistake. I think my wife conned me. But alhamdulillah, one of the best decisions I made. The work that I do, I work in youth and community work. Originally, I used to work in banking. I used to work for NatWest Bank. And then I transferred to the Royal Bank of Scotland, and then the Royal Bank of Scotland bought NatWest Bank, and then after a while, due to unforeseen circumstances with some little cousins and nephews, I got involved in youth work. And then while getting involved in youth work, I then, from a good friend, she encouraged me to start up my own youth work consultancy, where I work with youth clubs, mosques, churches, schools, prisons. So when I moved to Manchester, some of the people I used to work with in different schools and prisons called me, "Oh, I heard you moved to Manchester. Guess what? We got some projects for you to do in this prison." So alhamdulillah, now I work in Hindley prison, I work in Forest Bank prison. I do a project also that should be starting next month. And they used to call it Strange Ways, but now it's called Manchester Prison. Thankfully, there's a person from America who was starting up a diversity recruitment program. He contacted some people and they recommended me, and they've made me the UK head of Diversity Recruitment UK to get more black people and Muslims in work, especially graduates. And thank you very much. Hope that wasn't too long.
It's worth every minute.
Wow. So I was listening to this and I was thinking that there are some very suspicious overlaps in all of our CVs. So I also went to Oxford, I also was a corporate lawyer, and I've also made the migration to Manchester. Overlap with you, Ismail, is that my wife is Mancunian, and I have been, I'm actually literally live in the middle of, moving the house from London, where we were in East London, all the way to Manchester in Withington, hopefully in the next few weeks, but you never know with lawyers. So let's see where it lands, inshallah. I think you probably, I was speaking earlier anyway, so you know what I do for my day job, which is manage money. But I think the interesting thing for the purposes of this conversation is that I think a lot of startups, a lot of businesses are actually actively thinking for the first time, especially post-COVID, around different places, and different structures of work that don't have to be just focused around London and New York and Dubai and Tokyo, etc. And I think in particular from a startup perspective, Manchester was a bit of a no-brainer. Manchester, Birmingham, London, and I think to some extent Leeds are the places where, if you are going to base, that's kind of the options that you have. And my wife thought that the coffee shops in Manchester, the general hipster scene in Manchester was a bit better than Birmingham, which I think is probably true. So here we are.
Thanks all. Thank you for the introductions, but I think you've also done some of my work for me in terms of framing the discussion and getting into what the pull factors might have been for you to move to Manchester. So I know there was a spouse involved for the two gentlemen on the end, but Eve, what was the pull factor for you in moving back to Manchester? And might be pull factors for others as well.
Yeah, I'm sure there were brilliant Mancunian women definitely a part of that picture, to be honest, in the thread. So I guess in stepping back, why did I first move away? And growing up in Manchester in the 80s to get on, that was kind of the narrative we were told, really, as you went to London. So there's lots of common threads. I also went to Oxford when I left Wadi Range after being in college here. And then it was like that was the thing you did if you wanted to get on, whatever sector really. And it was a bit like almost used to go backwards if you're going back home. And to be honest, it took a bit of encouragement. I had my first child and decided that I needed to probably have somewhere more than one bedroom flat. And people kept saying, why are you moving back to Manchester? And again, I probably dragged my feet a little bit, to be honest, because I was thinking, I loved my life in London, I loved what I had, I loved everything about it, I loved my job. And similarly, I moved back and immediately back to Wadi Range, and I was just reminded really of kind of the struggle that I'd grown up in and how important community is to me, how important roots are to me, how important the fact that I leave my house and I see people that I smell and I know and I say hello to, and we're good neighbours to each other. And And quite quickly I was like, gosh, how did I like uproot and stay away for so long? It was 10 years in total. So it was other people, it was family, people saying pull back. It wasn't practical stuff, it was just too expensive to live in London, and this felt like a different option. And now I say to everybody, head north. Honestly, head north. And if you haven't read Andy, so Andy Burns actually read a book called Head North, which sets out the why. But there's so many reasons now, and I love the fact that lots of young people now growing up in Greater Manchester don't have the same narrative message that I certainly got in the 80s, that you need to move south and you need to move to London if you want to get on. In fact, quite the opposite. I speak to people now when I do go to London or places, and they all want to come here because they see the energy. Like, there's such a phenomenal energy in Greater Manchester. It's a great place that we do care for each other. We've got a real sense of shared value, shared identity. We really embrace our multicultural history and our radical kind of history. And we're also, out of London, we've got highest levels of growth than anywhere else in the UK. And we're seeing that in terms of the opportunity for careers, for new businesses to set up, and for us to make a real difference, to be real pioneers, not just across the UK, but internationally. So I say to everybody, come be part of it. It's the soul, it's grounded, there's community, and there's genuine opportunity. So yeah, I hope my story back then was different to now, but there's a love story for everybody here, isn't there?
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just, before you
Yes,
hand over to Ibrahim, just comment on some of the themes from what Eve and Ismail and Ibrahim have said? I think sometimes with a long-term career, it's more of a team sport than you realise, and having a support system around you and coming back to a family network, particularly if you're a woman, can be a really helpful thing in terms of a career. But the other element, I think, in terms of picking the place that you choose to build a career is just the wider networks and the people that you're going to have around. And going back, Ibrahim, to what you were saying earlier, traditionally there are places that are better set up for that sort of network. So the obvious example, Silicon Valley, if you want to head down the tech route, or New York or London if you want to go into the financial services sector. So if those are the sorts of sectors where you are wanting to build a career, how do you break away from that? Is it sensible to break away from that? And is the north a place where you can actually carve out a space for yourself? And given you're in the financial sector, maybe we start with...
Yeah, so like I said, even though I run a project called the Salam Project, where we do youth and community work, I've been approached where I'm working as part of the management committee of an organisation called Diversity Recruitment, which is a multicultural jobs board of corporate vacancies for graduates and college graduates in various sectors. And so many occasions I can go into colleges, go into universities and speak to young people about opportunities. And what we're seeing, that there are more and more, not just top British companies, top European companies, top companies from America, Japan, China, that are moving to Manchester. So now there's many more opportunities now. When I first came to Manchester, I had to do a project in a school, and that had a very notorious reputation. I loved the challenge because it reminded me of London, but yeah. And what I noticed when I was speaking to the young people, some of them would say, "Sir, when I finish my exams, I'm going to move to London so I can talk like you." Yeah. Anyway, but now I'm not hearing, when I'm going to schools, colleges, universities, I'm not hearing that as much as I did when I first came to Manchester. Recently, I had to do something at Staffordshire University with the African Caribbean Society. And when I went in there, while setting up for a presentation, I noticed, oh my gosh, they all got London accents. So in the beginning, like there's a room like this, I said, how many of you are from London? So from the people here, I would say around 80% of the people were from London. So this was 2 years ago, so I was flabbergasted. So I said, just asking, and I said, this is nothing to do with the presentation, this is just me being nosy. Where are you looking to live when you graduate? At least half of the people present from Staffordshire University, and most of them were from London, they said, we're planning to move to Manchester. They said they don't go back down to London. We're planning to move to Manchester because Manchester's got the infrastructure, they've got the businesses, they've got the opportunities, and it's a vibrant city. This is the only place where we can live. So, but sometimes, as you know, there's a saying, sometimes we don't acknowledge the things that we have until we lose it. So Manchester is a beautiful place. Many of my friends laughed at me, who thought I was crazy because I moved to Manchester. They've made jokes about me. And anyway, that's another story. Now, when they come to visit me, 9 out of every 10 of them said, bro, I want to move to Manchester. So please, Manchester is the thing.
I don't think you're able to.
Yeah.
So I think three observations from my side. One is with the investment pattern. If hands up who actually lives in London at the moment.
Ooh. We'll ask again in a year, yeah?
For a start, I hope you found that the commute wasn't ridiculous. That's the first thing. The second thing is, for the house that you live in at the moment, some of you will be living in a bedroom, some of you will be living in a cramped 3-bed house. I know, because I've been there. At one point I was renting a room in London and a 2-bedroom, quite a nice flat in Stoke-on-Trent, and I was paying more for the room in London, which is just bonkers. And so, for the same price of the house that the typical person has in London, you will end up with a mansion and possibly, security at the front of the house. So from a quality of life perspective, it's much better in Manchester. That's the first thing. Second thing I'd say is, and this goes back to Ria's point earlier about, if you're in a corporate job, it's true that London is still the beating heart. It's one of the big cities of the world, and it's one of the, the crown jewels of the UK as well, frankly, right? So we can't just ignore the economic reality and say, look, Manchester, this is where it's at. But what you can do is, with the way the world has changed, the way I work these days is I'm down 2 days a week in London. And I've, for some people that might be like, oh my God, that's like not sustainable. But it kind of depends on your own lifestyle. And actually, I find that, rather than, because my in-laws and my parents are in this region, rather than all of your family having to come up and down, relatively regularly, if you're the only one that's going down, that can be, quite an effective way of doing it. And if you're in a corporate world where, you've got law firms and banks and, accountancy firms, they often do have satellite branches in places like Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham. So, there is that potential to travel across. The final thing I'd say is, from a business perspective now, what would make a business interested in setting up in a place like this is, if you've been to Manchester Royal Infirmary and you see I think it's called City Hub, is it? 2.0 and 4.0, where there's a huge amount of investment going into the spin-outs, especially the medtech and biotech spin-outs in Manchester. Actually, that's the grassroots investment where you start seeing this coming together of talent, investment, and the startups and the businesses and the job creation. Once you get those three things coming to a critical mass in an area, that's where you see, the fertile soil for a business to come here and say, okay, we know that there's going to be sufficient skill set and sufficient, affluent or sufficiently prosperous people and sufficient kind of infrastructure for us to be able to, put our seed down here as well, and for us to see it grow. So I think that's actually one of the critical things that Manchester has got right relative to some of the other places around the country at the moment.
Thanks for that. I'm sure you'll agree a pretty strong case made for Manchester if you needed any convincing. But just before we finish up and open up for questions, there is one last question that I'd like to pose to you, just zooming out a little bit, which is not so much around Manchester, but actually just living in any city in the UK at the minute if you're Muslim. given some of the political rhetoric and the way that things are developing. I know people personally, I'm sure lots of you in the room also know of others who are actually considering moving abroad to somewhere that might be a little bit more accommodating of Muslims and Muslim values. So a little bit about that from each of you would be good before we open for questions, like I said. Perhaps we start with you as well.
Okay. I have to say this, and this is the truth from the heart. The British Muslims overall who've been living in Manchester, I don't think they realise what a good reputation they have. Because in my work, I've got to work with headmasters, prison governors, and teachers, and different people. And what I find amazing, you don't really get this in London. When it's Ramadan, they know. When I'm saying they know, the non-Muslim community, they know. Yeah, it's Ramadan. I remember someone telling me, yeah, it's Ramadan. Oh, my Muslim neighbor's going to give me some samosas, and they were celebrating. Yeah. I'm not saying samosas are everything, but in my humble opinion, by bringing that joy to your neighbor, I believe that's something good in Islam. And what I've noticed as well, and when it's Ramadan, because the diversity and inclusion in Manchester is so vibrant and strong, of course you're going to get the odd one or two negative person. Yes, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I would say in Manchester, when it's Ramadan, that's when you see everybody involved. And it's funny, sometimes I was doing this project in this group, people referring to it, and there was this Muslim brother who was fasting, but he never told anybody he was fasting, but he was a bit moody. And they went to someone went to the manager to complain, oh, he's a bit moody. And the manager said, no, leave him alone, he's fasting, it's Ramadan. So what I find amazing about Manchester is that many of non-Muslims communities, they're so clued up, well-read and educated on Islam, whereby in some cities, you need to get the play. Who's heard of play school? Does anyone remember play school, or am I showing my age? Put up your hands if you know play school. Yeah, so we need the play school version videos of Islam to teach. So I'll give you an example. One time I had to do a project in Huddersfield, and the lack of Huddersfield. First of all, Huddersfield is a lovely place, beautiful people. But I'm going to be honest. Forgive me, no disrespect. What I notice, people in the hierarchy are not as clued up on Islam and Muslims and Muslim culture as they are in Manchester. So I have to say that the Muslim community have a major part to thank for that, because it makes it easy for me, my colleagues, when I go places. They say, oh, do you want a place to pray? I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't get this in other parts. So I would say that the diversity and inclusion, so many people say, yeah, I want to go to Dubai, I want to go to so-and-so. No disrespect. Most people say who they want to go make Hijrah and go to certain countries. Forgive me, I would say at least 80% come back, because we all miss fish and chips, we all miss EastEnders, we all miss Coronation Street, but we don't like to admit it. But Manchester, the diversity and inclusion and Islam awareness is top-notch.
Yeah, it's a common trend, and I think it's a trend that's going to continue with people looking to go abroad. And I think part of that isn't really about Islam and Muslims, although I think that's an important trend. I think part of it is also just macroeconomic as well. But I would say that whenever I've asked, we've got a podcast on YouTube, whenever I've asked an Islamic scholar this question, their response is always, what would the Prophet do? What would the Prophet ﷺ do if he was in this country? And, the message of Islam and, to live a good life and to be an example that kind of adds value to the world is a universal message. And it doesn't really matter really actually where you are, that still applies. And so, for us to kind of think that we're going to flee, a particular area because, there's issues with it, Firstly, where are we fleeing to? Yeah, there's 250 million Muslims in India. There's 40 odd million or several tens of millions in both Russia and China. These are minorities in a large population. Where are they going to go to? So I don't think it makes sense to kind of think in that way. I actually think, rather than thinking, this is my Islam, and I'm going to be able to do my 5 daily prayers when I move to, somewhere in the Middle East. Actually, that wasn't the mindset of the Prophet and his companions, peace be upon him. They actually went out from Arabia to other lands to carry the message of Islam, to those regions. So I like to think that we've got a great opportunity here to, actually add value and to be outward looking. And I think places like the Heritage Centre are actually fantastic at doing that. They're one of the few establishments around the country where there's a lot of, outward engagement with the local community. I think that's what we need to be focused on.
Edith, anything you'd like to add before we open up to the floor?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just acknowledge experiences really. So one, I sincerely hope all of you in this room have experienced feelings of absolute belonging, of feeling at home in Greater Manchester. And I suspect all of you have also had moments of feeling like it's not somewhere that you can feel completely safe, and that you can go about with freedom and liberty in the way that you should. And I came to, I guess, sharp relief in the summer in particular, didn't it, where I know lots of my friends, and particularly, I guess, my female friends, who don't always feel that they can walk down every street with a hijab at night or on their own and feel that there's a risk. And that was heightened to a whole other extreme in the summer, where I know so many friends and colleagues who really felt that this suddenly was not a place for them. And that was a daily thing rather than something that may be just sometimes the day in some places. So I want to kind of acknowledge that both, yes, that's why I'm back here, because I grew up in Whalley Range. For me, living in Whalley Range, living in this community, experiencing, yes, the samosas and so much more in Manley Park as my local school, is what I want my 3 sons to be part of. For me, this is life at its richest. And I love that lots of people feel that this is a place that absolutely embraces our difference and doesn't just accommodate, but sees that as the richness of life that will help us all to live a genuinely good life, and acknowledge that, it's not where it needs to be, right? And there's a real rhetoric and narrative that is global, and that at the moment feels like it's getting worse and feels pretty scary. And I guess we have to acknowledge both of those things, and what my ask would be is we all have a role then to shift that narrative. We all have a role to do something and to believe, and I have absolutely every belief that we can, absolutely every belief that if people see and they feel for themselves, like the joy of getting on with your neighbour and of understanding each other and understanding the richness of our cultural differences, and us as humanity and as people and as neighbours, and our absolute superpower as human beings to care naturally for people that you've never met before and whose lives may look very different to you. If we draw upon those superpowers, we can build that fabric, and we can make it somewhere that people feel they belong, that they can get on every single day of every single year, and that they, like us, come live in Greater Manchester. So, we're doing what we can, certainly combined authority. I had lots of conversations with Andy Burnham recently about what can we do. We need to do more. We need to accelerate the great work that happens often in youth groups, raised by youth community workers and communities. It's in lots of pockets. What can we do to make that everywhere for everybody, every day? And that takes all of us acting. So, yeah, it's an ask really, because I think that's possible, but without blushing over the problem. You've been given the warning like the timing. You've got chatty pants, sorry.
It's good to go.
And lastly, I think to conclude the discussion on, because I think positivity and believing in yourself and your ability to make a change is something that I advocate for a lot of the time and a massive believer of. So a great call to action there at the end. Thank you, Eve, and thank you all. I'm sure you'll agree the panellists have been brilliant, so a round of applause for their man from Manchester.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.